Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to talk about losing the victory, 1 Kings chapter 20. We've been looking through the book of 1 Kings. We were introduced to Elijah back in chapter 17. There we saw the drought that came over the land. We see him by the brook Kerith, and then also in one of the Phoenician cities. In chapter 18, that was that instance on Mount Carmel where there was fire from heaven. And then in chapter 19, we see him flee down to the wilderness, the Sinai wilderness. He spends in Sinai, and this is where he is given this message from God to go and anoint 3 people who will replace the king of Aram, the king of Israel, and eventually himself as well. He anoints his replacement in the person of Elisha. So Elijah has been primarily in view in those chapters. As we come to chapters 20, 21, and 22, we will see Ahab primarily in view. So we're going to begin in this session. We're going to see war with Aram, and it will be placed at Samaria. Then in the following chapter, we'll see the issue of Naboth's vineyard. Again, this deals with Ahab and his wife Jezebel. And then finally, there's war with Aram, and we'll see an instance what happens at Ramoth Gilead, and that will bring us to the end of 1 Kings, but not the end of the book, because the book, remember, is 1 and 2 Kings. So our chapter begins, chapter 20 and verse 1. Now Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, gathered all his army, and there were 32 kings with him. So it's not just Aram, it's Aram and their whole confederation, and horses and chariots. And he went up and besieged Samaria and fought against it. Samaria is the capital of Israel. Now you have Judah in the south, but they're not part of the story. Samaria is the capital of Israel. Verse 2, we see negotiations begin where Ben-Hadad sent messengers to the city to Ahab, king of Israel, and said to him, thus says Ben-Hadad, your silver and your gold are mine, your most beautiful wives and children are also mine. In other words, I've already won. Verse 4, the king of Israel replied, it is according to your word. And notice the king of Israel is saying, you give up, you're right, I give up, my lord, O king, I am yours and all that I have. Verse 5, then the messengers returned and said, thus says Ben-Hadad, surely I sent to you saying, you shall give me your silver and your gold and your wives and your children. But about this time tomorrow, I will send my servants to you, and they will search your house and the houses of your servants, and whatever is desirable in your eyes, they will take in their hand and carry it away. You gave up, now we're going to take everything else. Verse 7, then the king of Israel called all the elders of the land and said, please observe and see how this man is looking for trouble. I gave up, for he sent to me for my wives and my children and my silver and my gold, and I did not refuse him. Verse 8, all the elders and all the people said to him, do not listen or consent. Enough is enough. Verse 9, so he said to the messengers of Ben-Hadad, tell my lord the king, all that you sent for to your servant at the first I will do. But this thing, now you're going above and beyond. This thing I cannot do. And the messengers departed and brought him word again. Verse 10, Ben-Hadad sent to him and said, may the gods do so to me and more also. Now we heard that sort of language back in chapter 19 when Jezebel was saying it about Elijah. May the gods do so to me and more. Well, here Ben-Hadad is giving that same sort of message to Ahab. If the dust of Samaria will suffice for handfuls for all the people who follow me. In other words, we're going to come and we're going to lay your city bare to the dust. Verse 11, then the king of Israel replied, tell him, let not him who girds on his armor boast like him who takes it off. In other words, it's not over yet. It's not over till it's over. Verse 12, that when Ben-Hadad heard this message, as he was drinking with his kings in the temporary shelters, he said to his servants, station yourselves. So they stationed themselves against the city. Notice this is all a story of escalation. Verse 13, now God's going to enter the picture. Now behold, a prophet approached Ahab, king of Israel, and said, thus says the Lord. So this is not a prophet of Baal. This is not a pagan prophet. This is a prophet, presumably of God. have you seen all this great multitude? And then God says, behold, I will deliver them into your hand today, and you shall know that I am the Lord. Verse 14, Ahab said, well, by whom? How are you going to deliver? What army? So he said, thus says the Lord, by the young men of the rulers of the provinces. And then he said, well, who shall begin the battle? If we're going to win, and you say our young people are going to fight, what am I waiting for? Who's going to start? And he answered, you. So Ahab is being told, go out and start the battle. Verse 15, then he mustered the young men of the rulers of the provinces, and there were 232. Gideon had more soldiers than Ahab has. And after them he mustered all the people, everybody else he could come up with, even all the sons of Israel, 7,000. Well, that's a bit better, but that's a very small group. Verse 16, they went out at noon while Ben-Hadad was drinking himself drunk in the temporary shelters with him, with the 32 kings who helped him. Verse 17, the young men of the rulers of the provinces went out first, and Ben-Hadad sent out, and they told him, saying, men have come out from Samaria. Then he said, well, if they've come out for peace, let them take them alive. Or if they've come out for war, take them alive. Just go get them, round them up. We'll see what this means. Verse 19, so these went out from the city, the young men of the rulers of the provinces, and the army which followed them, and they killed each his man, and the Arameans fled. Notice, it is a great win for Israel, a great defeat for Aram. And the Arameans fled, and Israel pursued them, and Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, escaped on horse with horsemen. Verse 21, the king of Israel went out and struck the horses and the chariots and killed the Arameans with a great slaughter. Again, that's a very great victory for Israel. Verse 22, when the prophet came near to the king of Israel and said to him, go strengthen yourself and observe and see what you have to do, for at the turn of the year the king of Aram will come up against you. You won battle 1. Battle 2 is coming up. That's going to be next. Verse 23, now the servants of the king of Aram said to him, that is to the king of Aram, their gods are gods of the mountains, therefore they were stronger than we, but rather let us fight against them in the plain, and surely we will be stronger than they. After all, Samaria is up in the hills, but they're saying, well, maybe this God of the Israelites is God of the mountains, because a lot of Israel is up in the mountains. We'll fight the battle on the plains, and he won't be able to reach us from there. Verse 24, do this thing, remove the kings each from his place, and put captains in their place, and muster an army like the army that you have lost, horse for horse, chariot for chariot, and then we will fight against them in the plain, and surely we will be stronger than they. And he listened to their voice and did so, because he's thinking the God of Israel is a little tiny God. He can only be God in a couple little places. We'll avoid those places, and then everything will go well. Verse 26, at the end of the year, Ben-Hadad mustered the Arameans and went up to Aphek to fight against Israel. Verse 27, the sons of Israel were mustered and were provisioned and went to meet them, and the sons of Israel camped before them like 2 little flocks of goats. But the Arameans filled the country. So again, you have little tiny Israel, great big Aram and all their confederates and all the kings that are with them. Verse 28, then a man of God came. Again, we have a prophet of God, and spoke to the king of Israel and said, thus says the Lord, because the Arameans have said, and then he repeats what the Arameans have boasted, the Lord is the God of the mountains, but he is not God of the valleys. Therefore, I will, because they had that wrong idea about God, I will give all this great multitude into your hand, and you will know that I am the Lord. Verse 29, so they camped one over against the other 7 days. And on the 7th day, the battle was joined, and the sons of Israel killed of the Arameans 100,000 foot soldiers in 1 day. But the rest fled to Aphek into the city, and the wall fell on 27,000 men who were left. Notice, a bunch die in battle, and a bunch flee into the city, and we don't know how it happened. What caused the wall to fall? I don't know. But the wall fell and killed a whole bunch more. And Ben-Hadad fled and came into the city, into an inner chamber. Verse 31, his servants said to him, behold, now we have heard that the kings of the house of Israel are merciful kings. First of all, they hadn't heard, they had come to the conclusion, the wrong conclusion, that the God of the Israelites was only God of the mountains. That was wrong. By this time, he shouldn't be listening to these advisors anymore. But notice, by now we've heard that the kings of the house of Israel are merciful kings. Please let us put on sackcloth on our loins and ropes on our heads and go out to the king of Israel. Perhaps he will save your life. And so they take the advice, verse 32, so they girded sackcloth on their loins and put ropes on their heads and came to the king of Israel, and they're in all humility, saying, your servant Ben-Hadad says, please let me live. Now notice, Ben-Hadad's not doing that, but he's sending his servants to be humble in his place. And the king of Israel responds with mercy. You say, well, is that a good thing? Well, maybe not. Let's continue reading. Notice he said, is he still alive? He is my brother. Well, he's not your brother. He was your enemy. If you're saying he's your brother, maybe you are speaking wrongly. Maybe you are making an alliance where there should be no alliance. Verse 33, now the men took this as an omen, and quickly catching his word, said, your brother Ben-Hadad, and he liked the sound of that, so he said, go bring him. And then Ben-Hadad came out to him, and he took him up into the chariot. Notice he's not receiving him as a conqueror versus a conquered, but rather as, hey, we're brothers, we're buddies. It was just all a big misunderstanding. Verse 34, Ben-Hadad said to him, the cities which my father took from your father I will restore. Well, okay, you mean you're giving back what you stole. And you shall make streets for yourself in Damascus, as my father made in Samaria. In other words, what we did to you, we're going to let you do sort of to us. And Ahab's the one who responds, and I will let you go with this covenant. And so he made a covenant with him and let him go. Notice he's entering into a covenant relationship with an enemy king. There are times when covenants, when you should not join yourself to an unbeliever, especially if they're still going on being an unbeliever. Verse 35, now we hear from a prophet. A certain man of the sons of the prophets said to another by the word of the Lord, and notice God is the one who is telling them what to say, please strike me. Strike me. I don't want to hit you, but the man refused to strike him. And then he said to him, because you have not listened to the voice of the Lord, behold, as soon as you have departed from me, a lion will kill you. And as soon as he had departed from him, a lion found him and killed him. Now, prophet A said, hit me. Prophet B said, I don't want to hit you. But prophet B did not obey the voice of the Lord. And so a lion went out and killed him. And that's a picture of what has happened in Israel. Verse 37, then he found another man and said, please strike me. And the man struck him, wounding him. So the prophet departed and waited for the king by the way and disguised himself with a bandage over his eyes. Notice the second time, the second person hit him like he should have, and then nothing bad happens to him. Of course, the prophet has been hit, and he looks like he's been hit. He's black eyes and bleeding or whatever. And he meets the king as the king passes by, and as the king passed by, he cried to the king and said, your servant went out into the midst of the battle, and behold, a man turned aside and brought a man to me and said, guard this man. If for any reason he's missing, then your life shall be for his life, or else you shall pay a talent of silver. Notice the prophet is pretending to be a warrior who was given charge over a captive on pain of death. He was to keep this captive, not let him go. Verse 40, while your servant was busy here and there, he was gone. In other words, he let the captive go away. And the king of Israel said to him, well, you already said what your judgment's going to be. You yourself have decided it. And now the prophet takes the bandage away from his eyes. And the king of Israel says, wait a second, he recognizes, you're not a soldier, you're a prophet. That he's one of the prophets. And notice he had gotten the king of Israel to pass judgment when in reality he was passing judgment upon himself. Verse 42, he said to him, "Thus says the Lord, because you have let go out of your hand the man whom I had devoted to destruction," that is Ben-Hadad, the one who had been delivered to you, and you'd been charged with holding on to him. "Therefore your life shall go for his life, and your people for his people." And so the king of Israel, who he gets it, the king of Israel went to his house sullen and vexed, and came to Samaria. Now, what do we do with that? It's a picture of the king of Israel's disobedience. Notice how he's not even named. We know who it is because we've been seeing Ahab before, and we see Ahab later on. But here, at this point at least, he's not even being named. He's just called the king of Israel. And perhaps because of that, we are supposed to look at this king of Israel and perhaps compare him with a much greater king of Israel who would come later. When I say that, of course, I'm talking about Ahab, the sinful king, and Jesus, the sinless king, and to compare these two. In the case of Ahab, because of his disobedience, he would forfeit his life in place of the enemy he had released. In the case of Jesus, because of his obedience, he gave his life in our place at a time when we were enemies of God. We were in the place of Hazael. And yet, he gave his life obediently for us. In the case of Ahab, notice at the end of the story, he was sullen and vexed over this pronouncement. But we read in Hebrews chapter 12 that for the joy that was set before him, Jesus endured the cross. Yes, despising the shame, but recognized that there was a joy to be had. And therefore, he gave his life for you and for me.